On the edge of a quiet town, a retired veteran stepped into a junkyard looking for scrap wood only to find a wounded dog hidden in the wreckage. But this wasn't just a rescue. What happened next left everyone speechless. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Something special is coming tomorrow. The cold wind rolled over the outskirts of town as Tom Riker stepped out of his old pickup truck. His joints ached from years of wear and tear, but he barely noticed it anymore. The junkyard ahead looked the same as it always did, silent, scattered with piles of twisted metal and broken things no one wanted. He'd been here a few times before, always looking for scraps of wood or forgotten tools. Since retiring from the army, time felt slower. The days stretched out, filled with chores and long walks to ease his back pain. He adjusted the worn cap on his head and grabbed his gloves from the dashboard. The sky was gray, low with heavy clouds. Rain threatened to fall but held back for now. He crossed the cracked pavement and pushed the rusted gate open. Its hinges creaked with resistance. Inside, rows of stacked wreckage stretched in all directions. Metal groaned in the wind. Birds circled above, calling out like they knew something he didn't. Tom moved through the maze of debris. His boots crunched over glass and gravel. A distant dog barked somewhere beyond the fence, muffled and sharp. He ignored it. Most of the nearby yards had dogs chained up. But after a few more steps he stopped. A different sound reached him, a low, broken noise. Not a bark. Not a growl. More like a whimper. He turned his head and waited. There it was again, soft but clear. It came from deep within the junk piles, behind a leaning stack of rusted refrigerators and twisted car hoods. Curiosity mixed with caution as he followed the sound, stepping carefully. He rounded the corner of a broken-down bus, peeled paint flaking under his fingers, and spotted movement beneath an old tarp. At first, it looked like a pile of trash. But then it shifted. A thin, shaking form crawled halfway into the open. It was a dog. Its ribs showed through patches of missing fur. One of its legs was bent the wrong way and dried blood matted its side. Its eyes were glassy and unfocused, but one of them flicked toward Tom with a flicker of life. He knelt slowly, heart racing, unsure why. There was something about the dog, something familiar. As he moved closer, he saw the collar. It was worn and barely hanging on, but the metal tag was still there. He reached out, gently turned the tag, and read the name engraved in faded letters. It hit him like a punch to the gut. Tango. He froze in place, breath caught in his throat. He had not said that name in years. His hands trembled as memories slammed into him. Desert winds. The roar of engines. The way this dog used to run ahead of him, ears high, tail steady. Tango had been his partner, his K-9 unit in Afghanistan. They had trained together, served together. Then one day, during a mission, a blast tore their convoy apart. Smoke, screams, confusion, and Tango disappeared. They searched for days. Everyone said the dog didn't make it. And eventually, Tom believed it. Yet here he was, 6 years later, barely alive in a junkyard near the edge of town. Tom's eyes burned. He swallowed hard and reached forward. Tango flinched, tried to pull away, but had no strength. Tom placed a hand gently on the dog's side. The bones felt fragile beneath his fingers. The heat of infection pulsed through the thin fur. He had to act fast. He stood, scooped the dog up carefully, and staggered back to the truck. The weight was nothing compared to the storm of emotions inside him. He laid Tango on the passenger seat, wrapped in a spare flannel shirt from the back. The dog didn't move, just breathed in shallow puffs. Tom started the engine, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than they had in years. Gravel sprayed as he turned and sped away from the junkyard. He didn't have a plan, just one thought pounding in his head: get help. The drive to the nearest vet clinic felt endless. Every bump in the road made Tango stir in pain. Tom kept glancing sideways, checking for signs of fading. He spoke softly, not expecting the dog to respond, but needing to fill the silence. He named old places, missions they had shared, little routines from their days in service. His voice cracked more than once. When he pulled into the small parking lot of the clinic, rain finally began to fall. Fat drops tapped against the windshield. Tom jumped out, scooped Tango into his arms again, and pushed through the clinic door. The staff looked up in surprise. He didn't wait to explain. One look at the dog was enough. The vet, a tall woman with silver hair and kind eyes, hurried over and directed him to an exam room. They laid Tango on the table. Machines beeped. Gloves snapped. Words flew too fast for Tom to catch. All he could do was stand there and watch. The vet eventually turned to him, her face calm but serious. The injuries were bad. Old wounds had reopened. A lung might be collapsed. Infection had set in deep. There was nerve damage and likely internal bleeding. She said survival wasn't certain. Putting the dog down was an option. Tom shook his head. He couldn't accept that. Not after finding him again. Not after all they had been through. Tango had survived this long on his own. That had to mean something. Tom promised that if there was even a sliver of a chance, he would take it. He would fight for him. The vet nodded slowly and said they'd do what they could. Tom sat by Tango's side as they prepared the IVs and medicine. He stayed through it all. He didn't flinch at the smell or the sight of blood. He had seen worse. What mattered now was being here. Tango was unconscious again, his breathing shallow. But Tom didn't leave. When the night came and the clinic closed its doors to the public, Tom remained in that room. A chair in the corner, a blanket draped across his shoulders. The hum of machines was steady, the air heavy with the mix of antiseptic and quiet hope. He didn't sleep much. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the desert again. He heard the explosion. He felt the guilt, the regret, the loss. But now, for the first time in years, he had something back. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The morning light crept slowly through the blinds of the small examination room. Tom sat stiff in the same chair, his back sore from the hours spent upright. His hand rested gently on Tango's side, feeling the shallow rhythm of his breathing. The machine still beeped, slow and steady. A sign that for now Tango was still holding on. The vet came in with a clipboard and a tired look in her eyes. She didn't say much. Just updated the chart, checked the 4-line, and offered Tom a quiet nod. The kind of nod that said nothing had changed, but that in itself was a small victory. Tom stood and stretched. He looked down at the dog he once knew as strong, fast, and proud. Now the animal barely moved. The cuts had been cleaned and bandaged. The broken leg had been set and wrapped tight. But it was the look in Tango's eye, even when closed, that stayed with Tom. There was pain, but there was also something else. Something deeper. A stubborn will that hadn't faded even after all the suffering. After talking briefly with the front desk, Tom signed some papers and paid the deposit. It took a chunk of what little savings he had, but he didn't hesitate. He made arrangements to bring Tango home later that day. The vet warned him that it wouldn't be easy. The dog would need constant care, antibiotics, rest, and physical support. Tom said he understood. Back at his cabin, he prepared everything the best he could. He cleared out a corner in the living room and laid down an old mattress layered with clean sheets and towels. He moved furniture around to make space and unpacked the medical supplies the clinic had sent with him. Bottles of pills, syringes, wraps and creams. It looked more like a small hospital ward than a home now. By late afternoon, the vet techs helped him carry Tango into the house. The dog didn't move much, just blinked slowly at the change of scenery. Tom placed him gently on the mattress and sat beside him. The air was quiet, broken only by the ticking of a clock and the occasional gust of wind outside. That night, Tom stayed on the floor next to the dog. He fed him soft chicken and broth, lifting the spoon carefully to Tango's mouth. The dog ate slowly, barely a few bites, but it was enough. Tom wiped the fur around his mouth and whispered simple words of reassurance. No commands. No orders. Just presence. Over the next few days, Tom built a routine. Morning started with feeding, medicine, and cleaning the wounds. Then light physical therapy, a careful massage of the legs, gentle stretches, and slow encouragement to shift weight from one side to the other. Tango barely responded at first. His body was weak, but Tom kept at it. He also took time to speak. Not just to Tango, but out loud, filling the silence. He talked about the past. About the base they trained at. The way Tango used to bark when he spotted a hidden threat. The long patrols under blazing sun. The night Tango found a buried IED moments before it could have killed them both. Tom didn't know if Tango understood, but it helped him remember. And remembering helped him feel something other than guilt. Tango's progress was slow. Some days were good. Others felt like a step back. There were times the dog wouldn't eat. Times he winced in pain from just trying to shift his weight. One morning, Tom found blood on the blanket and had to rush him back to the vet. A reopened wound. Nothing fatal, but a reminder of how fragile the recovery was. Tom didn't give up. He adjusted the meds. Changed the routine. He even built a small ramp outside the front door so he could wheel Tango out into the sunlight using a modified garden cart. He placed cushions inside and wrapped the sides so the dog wouldn't fall. Then slowly, they started taking short rides up and down the path behind the house. Those rides became a kind of ritual. Each morning, Tom would check the weather and, if it was clear, load Tango into the cart and roll him down the dirt path lined with tall trees. Birds called from the branches. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. Tango would lift his head a little higher each day, his nose twitching at the scents. It was during one of those rides, maybe the third week after bringing him home, when something changed. As Tom pushed the cart slowly along the trail, he felt a sudden movement. He stopped and looked back. Tango had shifted his front paws under him. They weren't steady, but they held weight. Then, with a deep breath, the dog lifted his head higher than he had in days and tried to sit up. He didn't manage it. His body shook too much. But the effort alone made Tom stop and kneel beside him. He placed a hand on Tango's back, steadying him, saying nothing. He didn't need to. From that moment, something began to shift. Tango's energy came back slowly. He started eating more, resting better. His eyes were clearer. He even tried to bark once, a raspy sound that barely made it out, but it was there. The scars remained. The legs still shook. The weight wasn't back. But something was changing inside him. Tom noticed it in the way Tango would turn his head when he entered the room, or how his tail thumped once against the floor when Tom walked in with a bowl of food. These weren't just instincts. They were signs of recognition, connection, memory. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Tom sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Tango lay beside him on a blanket. The air was calm. The world felt still. And for the first time in years, Tom didn't feel completely alone. He reached out and rested his hand on the dog's head. There was no salute, no ceremony, just a quiet moment between two old friends surviving one day at a time. The weeks turned into months. Winter passed slowly, leaving behind a trail of damp mornings and bare trees. Tom kept to his routine. Wake up early, prepare the meals, clean the bandages, massage the joints. Each day followed a rhythm, steady and deliberate. It was the only thing keeping him grounded. Tango had improved, but his recovery was far from smooth. Some mornings he would stand for a moment before collapsing back onto the blanket. Other days he'd manage to walk a few paces across the wooden floor before his legs gave out. Tom never rushed him. He understood that healing didn't follow a straight path. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was what came during the nights. Tango would sometimes wake in a panic, his body tense, legs scrambling as if running from something. He'd bark at shadows, growl at empty corners, and pant until his chest rattled. Tom would sit beside him, hands steady, voice soft, waiting for the storm to pass. Tom knew those nights well. He had them too. Most nights he didn't sleep deeply. The silence in the cabin pressed down on him. When sleep did come, it brought images he tried to forget, flashes of sand, the crack of gunfire, the deafening roar of explosions. Sometimes he'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, unsure of where he was. Tango would lift his head from the floor, watching him. They both recognized the signs in each other. The tremble in the limbs. The faraway look in the eyes. The weight that never fully left the shoulders. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. They had both carried the war back home with them. And now somehow that shared pain had turned into something else. Not peace. Not yet. But understanding. One morning, the air outside was crisp and the frost on the grass shimmered in the early sun. Tom helped Tango outside using the sling he had made. He wrapped it gently under the dog's chest and supported him as they moved down the small ramp. They didn't go far, just a few steps into the yard, but it felt like progress. Tango stood on his own for a short while. His legs wobbled but held firm. He sniffed the air, ears perked, eyes alert. There was life in him again. Not just survival. Awareness. Tom started taking him farther each day. They explored the edges of the property, walked slowly along the fence line, rested under the bare branches of the old oak tree in the corner. Neighbors started to wave when they passed by. A few even crossed the street to say hello. Tango, once ignored and forgotten, now drew curious eyes. His body still bore the signs of his battle, scars, a limp, patches of fur that hadn't grown back, but his spirit had changed. Tom noticed the change in himself, too. He talked more. Not just to Tango, but to people. The man at the hardware store. The woman at the post office. The young boy down the street who always asked if he could pet the dog. Each time, Tom said yes. He had once shut the world out. After the service, after the accident, after losing Tango, he had pulled back from everything. He had cut off friends, ignored calls, let birthdays slip by without reply. But now things were different. He didn't feel so far away from the world anymore. One afternoon, Tom and Tango sat on the porch, watching the trees sway in the wind. A pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Tom didn't recognize it at first. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in jeans and a long coat. His face was familiar in a distant way. He introduced himself as Sergeant Willis, retired now, like Tom. They had served in the same unit once, though in different roles. Willis had heard the story from someone at the local Veterans Center. A story about a veteran who had found his war dog in a junkyard. The details were vague, but the name had stuck with him. Tango. Tom invited him to sit. They talked for hours, filling in gaps, sharing updates on people they once knew, laughing quietly over old stories that still brought some warmth. Willis said he had never forgotten Tango. He had helped search after the blast, helped dig through the rubble. They never found a trace and assumed the worst. Tom told him everything. The junkyard. The injuries. The long road back. Willis listened in silence, eyes on the dog now resting beside Tom's feet. Before leaving, Willis asked if Tom ever thought about going to the group meetings at the center. Tom hesitated, then said maybe. He wasn't ready to share everything. But maybe someday. After the truck pulled away, Tom stood quietly for a while. He looked down at Tango. The dog looked up at him, tail giving a slow, steady wag. That night, Tom didn't wake from nightmares. The house was still. The only sound was the soft breathing of the dog lying by his bed. Spring was near. The days were growing longer. The cold was lifting. Tom felt it in the air, in his bones, and in the slow rise of hope he hadn't felt in years. There was still pain. Still scars. But something had changed. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were coming back to life. The rain came in hard that evening, soaking the ground and pounding against the windows of Tom's cabin. He stood at the kitchen sink, drying a pan, when the lights flickered once, then went dark. He reached for the flashlight he kept on the counter and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the room. Everything was still. He walked to the front door and checked the street, no lights there either. It was a full outage. He returned inside and found Tango lying near the back door, resting his head on a folded blanket. The dog opened one eye when Tom passed, then closed it again. The last few days had been good. Tango had walked unassisted for nearly 5 minutes that morning. Tom had even let him explore the far edge of the yard for the first time since the junkyard. The limp was still there, but the strength had returned. Tom lit a candle and placed it on the coffee table. The flickering flame sent soft shadows across the walls. He poured a cup of coffee from the still-warm pot and lowered himself into his recliner, letting the quiet settle over the house. The storm rolled outside, distant thunder rumbling low like a warning too far away to be urgent. It was close to midnight when it happened. The sound came suddenly, a loud crash of glass breaking. Tom sat up straight, heart thumping, the mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. Tango jolted up, ears alert, body tense. Tom grabbed the flashlight, clicked it on again, and moved slowly toward the kitchen. The back window was shattered. Glass sparkled on the floor under the dim light of the beam. Then movement. A figure in dark clothing stepped into view, ducking through the broken window. The man wore gloves and moved with purpose. Tom didn't get the chance to speak. The intruder struck him hard with a metal bar, sending him collapsing to the ground. Pain shot through his head and the world spun. The man stepped over him and began tearing through the drawers, tossing aside silverware and tools. He moved quickly, like someone who had done this before. He headed for the hallway, opening closets, kicking open the small locked cabinet where Tom kept his medals and old field gear. Then came the sound that changed everything. A growl, low, guttural, and steady. The kind that didn't come from fear, but from something deeper. A warning built on memory and instinct. Tango stood in the hallway, his body leaning forward, one paw raised slightly to avoid pressure on the weaker leg. His eyes were locked on the intruder. His lips peeled back just enough to show teeth. Rain dripped from the broken window, mixing with the wind as the intruder froze. There was a long pause. A moment of calculation. The man took one step forward and Tango leapt. He wasn't fast, not like he used to be, but the attack came with force. His teeth clamped down on the man's arm, driving him back into the wall. The man shouted in pain and swung the bar wildly, hitting Tango across the back. The dog yelped but didn't let go. Another swing connected, harder this time, and Tango finally fell, panting and bleeding on the floor. The intruder turned to flee. But even wounded, Tango rose again. With a final burst of strength, he lunged and knocked the man down, pinning him to the floor. The struggle continued as sirens echoed in the distance. A neighbor must have called. Flashing red and blue lights lit the room moments later. When officers rushed in, guns drawn, they found the man on the floor screaming and trying to push Tango away. The dog collapsed beside him, breath shallow, blood spreading across the wood floor. Tom regained consciousness just as paramedics arrived. He was helped to his feet, disoriented but alert enough to see the limp figure beside him. Tango didn't move. The paramedics lifted both Tom and the dog into the ambulance. Tom sat on the stretcher with his head bandaged, eyes locked on Tango. The dog was motionless, wrapped in towels, his breathing faint. The technician told him the stab wound had cut deep and there was too much blood loss. Tom placed a hand gently on the dog's head, whispering his name under his breath. The ride to the clinic was a blur. The storm outside continued to rage, lightning streaking the sky in bright flashes. Inside the ambulance, time slowed. The world became small, just the two of them, broken and silent. They reached the clinic. The doors burst open. Tango was rushed inside, Tom following close behind, ignoring the pain in his ribs and head. The vet team moved fast. They didn't need to ask questions this time. Tom wasn't allowed in the operating room. He sat in the waiting area, hands pressed together, staring at the clock. Hours passed. No news came. When the vet finally walked out, her face was grave. She said the surgery had been difficult. Tango had lost a lot of blood. The knife had missed the lung but tore muscle and veins. He would survive, but they had to remove the damaged leg. Tom nodded, unable to speak. He was led into the recovery room. Tango lay on the table, breathing slowly, bandages wrapped around his chest and shoulder. His eyes opened just enough to meet Tom's. His tail tapped once against the table. Tom sat beside him, placing a hand gently on the dog's head. The world outside moved on. But inside that quiet room, two lives once separated by time and war had been pulled together again, through pain, through survival, and now through sacrifice. They had both fought their final battle. And neither of them had done it alone. The days after the surgery moved slowly. The clinic kept Tango for 2 nights, monitoring his breathing and checking the stitches. Tom stayed nearby in a borrowed chair, dozing in short stretches and waking at every sound. The bandages were tight across Tango's shoulder. The missing leg left a space where strength once stood, but the dog's eyes were clear. He blinked slowly when Tom spoke. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. When the vet finally allowed Tango to go home, Tom was ready. He had already made changes to the cabin. He moved furniture out of the way and laid down carpets to help with balance. He built a new ramp at the back door, lower and wider than before. He bought a special harness, padded and firm, to help support Tango's weight. Everything was in place. Tango adjusted better than Tom expected. He struggled at first, tipping sideways when he moved too fast, but within a week he had learned to shift his weight. His body leaned forward differently now. Every step was a calculation, but he made it work. He didn't whine. He didn't hesitate. He moved forward. The porch became their routine again. Mornings began with coffee for Tom, a soft bed for Tango, and the quiet hum of birds returning for spring. The trees had started to bloom. Grass pushed through the old frost. Life continued, and they watched it happen together. News of the break-in spread quickly. A neighbor had shared part of the body cam footage from the responding officer. It showed Tango lunging through the hallway, protecting his home even in pain. The video caught attention online. The headline ran on local news first, then national outlets: Veteran Dog Saves Handler in Late-Night Attack. People shared it across social media. Comments poured in, words of admiration, stories of other military dogs, messages from veterans and strangers alike. Tom didn't expect the attention. He didn't want it, but he understood why it mattered. Tango had become a symbol, not of violence, but of loyalty. Not just survival, but courage. A dog who didn't forget his duty even after years apart. A friend who stayed until the very end and then beyond it. Then came the letter from Washington. A military foundation had nominated Tango for the Medal of Animal Valor. It was an award given rarely and only to animals who had shown extraordinary service or sacrifice. They asked if Tom would be willing to travel to D.C. for a small ceremony. Travel arrangements would be covered. Tango would be honored before an audience of service members, families, and military leaders. Tom stared at the letter for a long time before responding. He said yes. The flight was quiet. Tango wore a soft vest, blue with a patch sewn on the side. Retired K9, do not pet. He lay across 2 seats, unmoving except for the occasional twitch of his ears. Tom kept one hand on his back throughout the flight. It was the first time either of them had left their small town in years. The ceremony took place in a wide hall lined with flags. Rows of chairs faced a simple stage. The crowd was respectful, many in uniform. When Tom and Tango entered, a ripple moved through the room. People stood. Some clapped. Others just watched quietly. A general stepped forward and read from a prepared statement. He spoke about Tango's service. His work in detection, his bravery during combat, his survival in the junkyard, and finally, his defense of his handler during the attack. The words were strong but simple. They didn't need to be poetic. The truth was enough. Then Tom was called forward. He walked slowly to the microphone. Tango stayed beside him, moving with quiet effort. His steps were stiff, but his head was held high. The missing leg didn't take away from his presence. Tom didn't bring a speech. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, young soldiers, older veterans, children sitting beside their parents. Then he looked down at Tango. He spoke from the heart. He said he had served with good men, men who gave everything. He had known loss and fear and silence. But no one had stood by him like Tango had. Not in war. Not in peace. Not in pain. And when everything else had been stripped away, it was this dog who stayed. The room was quiet when he finished. A small medal was placed gently on Tango's vest. The general stepped back and saluted. Tom returned the gesture, his eyes wet. Then they turned and walked off the stage together, slow and steady. The moment spread. Photos were shared. Videos went viral. Schoolchildren wrote letters. One class sent hand-drawn cards, each showing a brown dog with 3 legs and a hero's medal. A sculpture was commissioned by a veteran group, small and bronze, Tango standing on 3 legs, eyes forward, one ear perked. It would be placed in the courtyard of the local veterans center. Back home, life settled again. Tom returned to his porch, the same chair, the same rhythm. Tango rested nearby. Some afternoons they sat for hours without a word. The wind passed through the trees. The sun slid down the sky. Tango no longer walked as far. Age caught up quickly. The recovery had taken more from him than Tom realized. But the dog didn't seem to mind. He spent most days resting by the window or lying beneath the old oak tree in the yard. His eyes still followed Tom wherever he went. Then came one quiet evening. The sun was low. The sky was gold. Tom sat with a cup in his hand, watching the light stretch across the field. Tango lay beside him, breathing slow and deep. Tom reached down, placed a hand gently on the dog's head, and held it there. No command. No ceremony. Just peace. Tango closed his eyes. His body relaxed. Tom didn't move. The silence that followed was full not of emptiness, but of everything they had lived through. They had survived war. They had survived loss. And now, side by side, they had found something close to home. If you loved this story, like the video.